Welcome to video 3 of Agreements Level 2. In today's video, we're going to learn the third component of creating working agreements. Before we do, let's take a moment and review what we learned in video 2. Now, we discussed renegotiating agreements and how the proper time to renegotiate is as soon as we realize that there is a chance that we might not be able to keep it. Agreements cannot be renegotiated in the breaking zone. At that point, it's just a broken agreement. Then you put this into practice and started renegotiating. What differences did you find? Were you able to keep more of your agreements? Did your stress level go down? Did you notice any patterns? Did you happen to realize that maybe you have been entering into a lot of non-working agreements? That leads us to the third component of creating working agreements. Say no more often. Only take on agreements you're willing to keep. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, "Those who are slowest in making a promise are the most faithful in the performance of it." Only take on agreements that you are willing to keep. Ask yourself, if I knew that breaking the agreement would cost me $1,000, then would I still make this agreement? Going back to my agreements book, on the front of the cover I said, do I really want to make this commitment? So it'd remind me every time I make an agreement. Is that something I'm really willing to keep? How often do we break the agreement in the making of the agreement? Maybe it's something we really don't want to do, but we're agreeing to it because it's easier than being authentic and telling the truth. Maybe the task is something we don't know how to do, and that's triggering for us. So what do? We overcompensate, we overpromise. Maybe breaking the agreement and the feeling of shame is seemingly more easy because it's more familiar. But take a moment and ask yourself, is taking on agreements we cannot guarantee really easier? What truly are the consequences of forcing yourself into inauthentic and taxing agreements? What are the consequences of breaking your agreement, and whose responsibility is that? Sandy Davis teaches, because your reality and your destiny are both largely shaped by the agreements you make, take care to make them wisely. I stated in the first video of this series on how being a person of integrity, person of your word, really shapes our life. Keeping our agreements gives us the freedom to be effective and authentic. But if saying no was easy, then we wouldn't become overwhelmed with everything we agree to. Tony Blair of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change famously said, "The art of leadership is saying no, not saying yes." It's very easy to say yes. I've previously discussed the concept of easy now, hard later, versus hard now, easy later. Entering into an agreement because it's easier to appease the other person in the short term is easy now. But dealing with the fallout and the damage it could do to the relationship is hard later. Telling someone on your team that no, you're not willing to renegotiate and you're actually going to hold them accountable to the original agreement is hard now. But your consistency, creating a culture of keeping agreements, makes life much easier later. It actually takes far more influence to say no and hold people accountable. Accountable to their agreements, accountable to your boundaries, accountable to their potential. So if you find yourself ever overwhelmed, know that the answer is simply say no more often. Now, Elizabeth Gilbert tells a story in a magazine article about Mike Tyson's white tigers. Tyson blew his tremendous boxing fortune on things like 6 mansions, more than 100 fancy vehicles, and a $2 million bathtub supposedly made of gold. But most notably, a pair of white tigers. Gilbert writes, "There's a picture of Mike Tyson that will stay with me forever. He's posing in a jungle landscape, wearing nothing but a loincloth and baby oil, and holding one of his 2 majestic white tigers by the chain. To my eye, he looks at once manic, defensive, and really, really tired." She explains on how in her life she'd always been really, really tired. But her problem wasn't a lack of energy. It was that she had been squandering it. As she said, pouring it down a suckhole of exhausting behaviors. Among other things, saying yes when she really meant to say no. She teaches that we all have our own white tigers, something we're holding on to that's capable of devouring our lives and utterly depleting our energy if we're not careful. So, this is my challenge to you. Say no more often. Only commit to agreements that you're willing to keep. Practice saying no once, then say it again, until it becomes easier. And up next, putting all of this into practice. We'll see you there.